Okay.
Okay, so Shabbat Tov, Boker Tov. I'm sorry for being late a few minutes. The printer began to do some problems. Baruch Hashem, we overcame it, and we are juggling along. So that's a special shiur for Tu B'Shvat. So though we are already in the 20th century, I am venturing a little earlier. For when we speak about Tu B'Shvat, we speak about blooming, reblooming, and planting of trees, and especially on Eretz Israel. And I want to speak today about one of the leading rabbinical figures of the replanting of Am Israel in Eretz Israel in the 19th century. And that is Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov, Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov, who was part, as we will see, of the famous Aliyat Talmidei Agra, the Aliyah of the students of the Gaon of Vilna, Rabbi of Vilna. And he was not only a part of this Aliyah, but he was a key figure in this Aliyah, both from a, we can say, political point of view, meaning he was a political leader, and also from a halachic point of view, is one of the most important poskim, halachic decisors that was taking part, engaged in the halachot related to Eretz Israel at the time. So from where did come Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov? As the name may hint, it comes from Shklov. That's, we do not know the exact date of birth. We estimate that it is around 1770. So that's about it. And as I said, in Shklov, his family is a rabbinical family, a very rooted, what can be called Lithuanian, what later would become to be known Mitnagdik family, very strong in Talmud Torah. His father was a certain Rabbi Shmuel, but when he signs his edition, he edited, as I would speak about in a few minutes, Bezrat Hashem, he edited the commentary of the Vilna Gaon, of the Gra, on the Shulchan Aruch Or Chaim. And so he has a small introduction of his own to this commentary, and there he signs. And when he signs the following. If you can please pass these pages. I would also share it on the Zoom. Look at this first source. Excuse me, the second source. The second source. That is from the way that he signed the introduction, his introduction to the commentary of the Gra. And there he writes, Divrei Askupa Nidreset. So this is the words of, he calls himself Askupa Nidreset. That's like the doorstep that is being stepped upon. So that's a very humble term. So he says, I'm like a doorstep, please step on me. And for Talmidei Chachamim, Israel, my name is Israel, and I am a son to my father, Adoni Avi, Kvod Moreinu V'Rabbeinu, Arav Rabbi Shmuel Nero, meaning that's the blessing of the living, Nero, Natri Rachmana V'Yishmerei, God should save and keep him. Ben Aish Hayere Elokim Hamuflag Hamanoach, I'm a grandson to the man who was fear of God, Hamuflag, who was beyond normal human beings. Hamanoach, the late Moreinu V'Rabbeinu Arav Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov, Zatzal, Ishmera Tzura V'Interea, that's for Shklov. And he says, what was so special about him? Shenasa la'aretz hakdosha. So he wants to connect himself, even when he signs the commentary, his edition of the commentary of the Gra to the Shulchan Aruch Or Chaim, it has nothing to do specifically with Eretz Israel, but that's the way that he sees himself. That's the way that when he looks at his family, what is he proud at? He says, my grandfather made a journey to Eretz Israel. Excuse me? Oh, okay, so that's a complicated question. In source Aleph, I would not read it now inside, but in source Aleph we have Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov was a shtickle historian. He was a rabbi, he was a political leader. He also had a very acute historical conscience, you may say. And in a few places, he wrote really historical essays. Of course, it's not professionally historic. But he is writing what he sees, and he sees it as important to make an account of the historical events as were unfolding in front of his eyes. And some of these historical accounts of him remained and survived, and some unfortunately did not. Some had survived, and they were copied to a certain degree of reliability in the beginning, in the end of the 19th century, and then we have lost the source, unfortunately. So we rely on the copies, which, as I said, they are of good reliability, but may have skipped a few lines here and there. And one of these accounts that he wrote was in a pinkas. Pinkas means a notebook. So there was a notebook for the Koilel Prushim of Tzfat. I would explain what it is, Bezrat Hashem, as we continue. So there was like it was like a bookkeeping. And he wrote an introduction to the bookkeeping. And he was also a good accountant. And so he wrote an introduction to the book, to the bookkeeping, to the book. And in it, he explains the history of how he established the Koilel in Tzfat. And there he decides that he would write about his grandfather. From there we have the knowledge about his grandfather. So his grandfather, Rabbi Yisrael, wanted to make Aliyah in 1772. So 2 years after the birth after the estimated birth of our hero, his grandfather made Aliyah in order to make Aliyah. However, he came to Eretz Israel, and there he understood that life are very difficult, as you may not be so surprised to hear. So Eretz Israel was in a very dire state, and there was no money. So his grandfather wanted to go back and collect money in Europe for the Ashkenazi settlement in Eretz Israel, because making a very long story short, the Sfaradim took over all of the money contributions that were coming into Eretz Israel. That's without right now pointing fingers at anyone. But that's just what happened. There were good reasons for that. But the bottom line is that when the Ashkenazim tried to reestablish themselves somewhere in the 18th century, they discovered that even if someone contributes money, it goes through the Sephardic community and somehow get lost. So in order for them to be able to survive, because again, surviving on their own means was very, very, very difficult. So in order to survive, they wanted to collect for themselves. They sent Rabbi Yisrael to Europe to collect. He collected, he was successful in his mission. That's how his grandson describes it. However, unfortunately, he passed away on his way back. So he tried to make Aliyah, but things didn't really come out as he hoped for. But it's very important, this background, because we would see that the grandson, in a way, also sees himself as a continuation of his grandfather. So he was born, as I said, around 1770, and in the last year of the Gra, in 1796, that is the last year for the life of the Gra, so he's around 25, very young. He comes to the Gra house in Vilna to learn with the Gra didn't hold the yeshiva, was not giving public shiurim, didn't hold any formal position in Vilna. If you wanted to learn by him, you just have to knock on the door and hope that they would accept you in the house and try to be with him as much as you can. And Rav Yisrael came very devoted and dedicated, with a very firm decision that he is going to serve the Gaon of Vilna, not only to learn from him, but just to be with him. And for the last 8 or 10 months of the life of the Gra, he is there in Vilna. And according to his own testimony, in the last 20 days of the Gra's life, he did not leave him for 1 second. And he was, as you can imagine, he was deeply impressed and affected from the Gra. And from there on, everything he would do, write, act, would be shaped by what he was taught by the Vilna Gaon. So just again, see for example, there is a beautiful introduction. This is his monumental work. It's called the Peat of Rav Yisrael, our hero, called Peat HaShulchan, meaning the side of the table. And again, we would explain why he chose this name later. However, this Peat HaShulchan has introduction. And in the introduction, he speaks about his Rav, the Gra. So just a few lines, you can see it source Gimel here. Rabbeinu HaKadosh HaChasid. So our holy, and when he says here Chassid, it doesn't mean Baal Shem Tov, right? It means true Chassid. So our pious and holy Rabbi, Zichrono Levarcha, Haya Marganita Delet Leitima. He was like a diamond, without end, without equivalent. כאחד מדורות הראשונים. He was like one of the early generations. Although he lived in the time of the Achronim, right, of the last rabbis, we should approach him, says his student, as he was one of the early rabbis. כאשר תורתו הקדושה מעידה עליו. Just look at his Torah, he says. You can see that he's one of the early ones. וחיבוריו שחיבר יותר מ-70 חיבורים, he wrote more than 70 essays or books. וכל דבריו בלישנא קייט, everything he wrote is in very short, very terse. If you know the way that the Gra writes, it's very, very short. That's one of the big problems in learning his Torah. He wrote for geniuses. So you read a line and then you have to sit on it for half an hour or sometimes for half a day. ככוכבים אשר ברכי השמיים, he says that's like the stars in the heavens, which we see as very little. But if you'd approach them, they would be huge and full of light. He says every line of the Gra is like the stars in heavens. That's a very beautiful metaphor. וכל החיבורים חיבר הכל, he says about his Rabbi the Gra, all of his books he wrote until he was 40 years. And then he was not even able to write anymore. He says because his mind, היה מעיין נובע, his mind was like a stream that cannot stop. So he couldn't stop himself to sit down and write. His mind was always racing to the next idea. שבלתי אפשר היה למי ומי לכותבן. וכמו ששמעתי מבנו הרב הגדול ז"ל ששמע מפיו, שהיה לו 150 פירושים בפסוק הראשון בשיר השירים. He says, I heard from the Gra's son that the Gra had 150 explanations on the first pasuk of Shir HaShirim alone. שיר השירים אשר לשלמה. How many commentaries can you write on these 5 words? But he says, we had 150 פירושים, ולא נמצא איש סופר מהיר שיכתוב כדעתו. But there was no one that could sit down and write as fast as he would tell him the 150 comments. I'm sure that if you have 150, they are very deep, so it takes time to explain. And he couldn't find a writer that would be able to write it fast enough. ולא רצה להפנות זמנו הקדוש לזה. And the Gra felt that it's not worthy of his time to write down these 150 פירושים. So he never did it, and we don't have it. It's amazing. And then he tells a wonderful story. He says, לא יכולתי להתאפק. I cannot hold myself from telling you a story, he says, about my Rebbe. And that is סיפור אמיתי נפלא, it's a true story, that I heard מפה קדוש, תלמיד מובהק של רבינו הקדוש, רב חביב נוח נפשו, הרב החסיד הגדול המפורסם, מקובל, הגדול המפורסם בעולם, כבוד מורנו רבינו רב מנחם מנדל. So he speaks about another Shklov resident, former resident, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mishiklov, that also was a student of the Gra in Vilna, and he told him that when the Gra finished his commentary on Shir HaShirim, the Gra was extremely happy, and he wanted to do a small siyum, but it's a siyum by the Gra. So what did he do? He says they closed all the doors and the windows, and so it was dark in the room, no electricity, of course. They lit candles in the middle of the day, and he says, the Gra looked to heaven, עשה עיניו למרום, בדבקות עצומה, clinging to השם, בברכה והודאה לשמו הגדול יתברך שמו. So he thank הקדוש ברוך הוא for being able to finish this commentary without the 150 פירושים, right? But just the regular commentary on שיר השירים of the Gra. And then he says that זיכהו להשגת אור כל התורה בפנימיותיה וחוצותיה. So the Gra said, you think I only finished שיר השירים now. I did not only finish שיר השירים now. I finished all the Torah. For it's in external, in its חיצוניות, in the what we call halacha, but also the pnimiut, the secrets, the internal learning of the Torah. And he said, I also have learned כל החוכמות הנצרכים בתורתנו. I did not only learn Torah, said the Gra, but also all of the wisdoms that are needed for Torah. So I learned הזכירם, חוכמת האלגברה, right? משולשים, that's geometry. הנדסה, I am not sure it's engineering, so חוכמת המוזיקה, he says. I learned music. ושיבחה הרבה. הוא היה אומר אז כי רוב טעמי תורה וסודות שירי הלוויים וסודות תיקוני הזוהר אי אפשר לידע בלעדי. If you do not know music, you cannot know the secrets of Torah. Now, of course, I have no idea even why would you need music in order to know the secrets of Torah, but if he learned and he knows, then I have to believe what he says. Yeah, of course. ועל ידה יכולים בני אדם למות בחלות נפשם מנעימותיה, ויכולים להחיות המתים בסודותיה הגנוזים בתורה. He says the way that music is such a strength, that if you learn Torah good enough and you understand, again, the secrets of the Torah, you can compose music that can kill people, and you can compose music that would revive people. He says, תחיית המתים can be done through the medium of music. That's mind-blowing. I have no idea what he's meaning, but it's amazing. אחר כך אמר, כי ברוך השם, כל התורה כולה שניתנה בסיני ידעה לתכליתה. Again, amazing. So that's the testimony from the Gra, that the Gra said, now I know all the Torah that was given in Sinai from beginning to end, לתכליתה. ולא נשאר, וכל הנביאים וכתובים ומשניות ותורה שבעל פה, האח גנוזים בה, ולא נשאר לו שום ספק באיזה הלכה וסוגיה בכל התורה לעת זקנתו. He says, I have no open questions. Everything is closed. Everything is known. However, he says, רק שני דברים חמורים בסתרי תורה שבזוהר היו מוקשים. So he says, I have only 2 questions left. That's what the Gra said. And if I would have known who can answer me, I would have walked by foot to him. That's what the Gra said, although he was very old at the time. וממתין בזה על משיח צדקנו. And then after knowing everything, if I would have been able, and I would have known everything, then I would be done and just wait for Mashiach. And he says that they asked him to write the secrets that he knows. Of course, he refused, and he said, I'm keeping the knowledge, the secret knowledge, to give the first drasha when I go to heaven on Gan Eden. So I don't want to spoil the drasha. So no spoilers, and he didn't. That's you don't even know to what extent. I mean, I guess he was serious, the Gra, but that's saying that he doesn't want to reveal because he's keeping it for his drasha on the world to come. That's what he said to his students that were there in this, I don't know if to call it a mesiba, a siyum, right? But it's not a regular siyum. It's a siyum on all the Torah, everything, part of 2 things that he had difficulties with.
Did he explain what the 2 were?
No, he was not willing to I mean, to be honest, I would assume that even if he would have said, I wouldn't even understand what the question is, let alone the problem, let alone the answer. So that's I think it's beyond people of my value. But that's an amazing story. So that is how he relates to his Rebbe. So he says, I learned from someone who knew all the Torah from the beginning to end. Now, when you come, and that's how you feel, you have certainty. And I think certainty is something that is very important to understand that he had. He would not be able to achieve, would not be able to survive what he had to go through without this certainty that he's doing the right thing. So let's continue. After the Ptira of the Gra in 1797, he began, together with the aforementioned Rabbi Nachem Mendel Misheklov, to edit the commentary of the Gra and to print it in order to publish it in the world. He was the editor, the main editor of the first volume that went out, that was printed, which is the commentary of the Gra on Orach Chaim. Now that in itself is amazing because, as I said, he was very young, less than 30. There were students of the Gra that were 60, 70, that were old and very HaShulchan, very important people. Reb Chaim of Volozhin, very important people. And they all led this young guy that just came in at the last year of the Gra to take control. So it may be that there were some tensions there. And I would explain why I'm saying that. But he was given the work of an editor. And what he decided to do, and that is somewhat surprising, but somewhat also not surprising. On the one hand, he is, as I said, he is completely battle. He doesn't see himself as anything in relation to his teacher. But because he understands himself to be the student of his teacher, he also allows himself to edit the work. No, there are two ways of editing, or two poles, you may say. One is very light editing. You only copy, and if there is a spelling mistake, you correct the spelling mistake. You make sure that all of the references are correct, but very, very light. There is another way of editing in which you are more involved, let's say, with the text. There may be a more strong, heavy-handed editing in which you see yourself as almost an interpreter or the text needs to be translated, maybe. Now, he was more of the third type. So he allowed himself to interpolate with the text of the Gra. Now, he had good reasons why to do that. As he himself wrote, the Gra wrote in very terse sentences. And also you have the Gra himself wrote something. After a few years, he wrote another thing. After another few years, he wrote another thing. So if you just bring them one after the other, you cannot understand what the question, what the conclusion, what was written, what is the final, what is the bottom line. So what he did was to take all of these different writings and mesh them together until you got with something that is coherent. And as he himself says in the introduction, you would not even be able to know, if I would have not written it to you, you would not even been able to know that the Gra wrote several editions. Now, on one hand, it's very beautiful. Now you can read it, and it is far from being easy read, but it can be clear. If you would give the time, you would understand it perfectly. The problem is that, again, I'm relying here on Rav Eliakim Krombein, who wrote a whole long few articles about the students of the Gra, and he was the one that was able to tease out these differences and tensions, and so I'm relying on him. So on the same book of the commentary of the Gra, when it was printed, there was also an introduction by Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who took pain to explain that he was involved in the editing process. Again, you see that if you need to take such pains, it means that some people are not happy. And also there is an introduction from the sons of the Gra, the Gra two boys. And they're not boys now. They are very important rabbis by their own right. And there they say that our father had 7 important students, and they name the 7 important students, and R Yisrael of Shklov is not mentioned as even one of the 7 important students. Now, that's in itself, that's embarrassing in a way, right? And then also, Rabbi Shklov in this introduction, he says, and I hope to be involved in the printing of the next volume. However, when you come to the next volume, he is not mentioned, and it seems that he was not taking part of the printing of the next volume. So again, and that's a speculation. These are the facts. The interpretation, as it is understood by Rav Krombein, and I think that it is very much making sense, is that it was decided that he would not continue to edit the work, as it seems that while he had the backup of Reb Chaim of Volozhin, the Gra children and maybe some other students were not happy with the way, with the liberty, we may say, that he took with the commentary of the great Gra, and the next editions are not like that. I mean, they are not remixed. Yeah, everything is just according to what the Gra wrote, and break your own head on how to reconcile the different editions. So he went back to Shklov, and there was a Magid. I mean, he was a Darshan in Shklov for about 10 years. In 1809, he decides that he is going to make Aliyah. As I said, that's obviously a trend in his family. His father and mother also made Aliyah more or less at the same time. We don't have the exact date, but we know that 4 years later they are already in Eretz Israel. So either that they went immediately with him, maybe a year before, a year after, but that's the same time frame. And also the Gra was very big on Eretz Israel. The Gra himself tried to make Aliyah, but for secret reasons that we do not know what they are. He turned in the middle of his journey and went back to Vilna. Now that's a fascinating story. Books were written about why did the Gra journey, then why did he stop and turn back? And we don't have a clear answer. It's almost certainly because of Kabbalah. I mean, there were some reasons that were indicative for him to go. There is a suggestion, a very interesting one. Again, I am mentioning it not because I think it is correct or that it is more correct than other suggestions, but just because it is very interesting. So some say that he hoped that he would journey to Eretz Israel in order to learn maybe the secrets, the only two things he was not able to know, you can only understand in Eretz Israel. But in his journey, for some reason, he understood that it's not the right time. So even if he would be in the right place, he would still not know the answers, and then he decided that he's more needed in Vilna and turned back. Now, that's an interesting theory. We have his signature, it seems, in Amsterdam, which doesn't seem to be on the way to Eretz Israel. So it seems that he left for Eretz Israel, but thought that it would be good for him to go through Amsterdam, maybe because Amsterdam was the capital of Jewish printing at the time, and he hoped to be able to acquire books that he was not able to acquire in Europe. Again, everything is speculations. Very, very interesting. But many of the Gra students also made Aliyah. And they established what was later be called the Old Settlement, HaYishuv HaYashan. Obviously, when they made Aliyah, it was not Yashan, it was Chadash. But when the Zionists came at the end of the 19th century, they saw the students of the Gra as HaYishuv HaYashan. And that's how they became to be named. So in 1909, as part of this Aliyah of the students of the Gra, that's the third wave of Olim. He is making Aliyah to Eretz Israel, and they established their base not in Yerushalayim, but rather in Tzfat. Why is that? That's a good question. There may be several reasons for that. One is that, as I said earlier, in Yerushalayim there was some type of a competition with the Sephardi community. It was not so simple. Also, there was a hanging debt over the head of the Ashkenazim, because Rabbi Yehuda Hasid, 100 years earlier, made Aliyah with a group of Hasidim, we may say. Again, it's before the Baal Shem Tov. They are more related, again, according to speculations, they are more related to Shabtaim. But he's making Aliyah, and they acquire the land upon which they wanted to build the Bet Knesset HaChurba of our time. And that was very costly. They were never able to return the money because Yehuda Hasid died a few months after he made Aliyah. So he was the leader. After his passing, then the whole thing fell apart. They were not able to pay back the debt. And for the Turkeys, for the Ottomans, every Jew that looked like an Ashkenazi, that meant that he has to pay for the debt of these Ashkenazim for 100 years ago. So even when Ashkenazim came to Yerushalayim, they had to dress as the Sfaradim. That's why you see some of the Hasidim in Yerushalayim to this day dressed not in an Ashkenazi garb, but in an Eastern one. That's how that came to be. So that was one very good reason why not to go to Yerushalayim. The other good reason why not to go to Yerushalayim is because there is a tradition that Mashiach is going to come from the Galil. And now this tradition in itself, it's very interesting. It's not in the Gemara or anything like that. It's like another secret tradition. And there are other traditions, but there is such a tradition. And it may be that also played a part in the decision to settle in Tzfat. So that's what they do. They go to Tzfat, and then they understand that in Tzfat also money is not growing up on the trees. So even if you go to live in Tzfat and they have 40 families, so 150 Jews, let's say, in Tzfat, Ashkenazi Jews, but most of them were Rabbanim. They didn't really know how to make a living, and even if they would have known, they were paying heavy taxes. It was difficult. Life was difficult for everyone in Eretz Israel at the time. There were diseases, everything. So Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov is going in the footsteps of his grandfather, and he now goes back to Lithuania in order to collect money. But he doesn't want only to collect money. He wants to establish a yearly subsidy that would be paid from Lithuania in order to hold the Ashkenazi kollel, that's the kollel prushim that we mentioned earlier, the kollel prushim of Tzfat. And everything would be distributed in a very even way. So he makes contact with Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Reb Chaim of Volozhin is the responsible person in Lithuania. Now he's extremely, as you know, extremely great in Lithuania, so a very important person, Reb Chaim of Volozhin. If he's heading the kuppah, that's a kuppah you would contribute to. And the money goes to Eretz Israel, and they have a very, very specific clause. How much can you get? How many hours a day can you learn? He has a chidush. Even if you work, you get money. Because in Chutz La'aretz, only if you learn, you get money. But in Eretz Israel, working is also a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Israel, so you should get money even if you work. Although you may say, if you work, why do you need money? But as we said earlier, working is not necessarily enough in order just to have bread on the table. So he's extremely successful in his mission. He's also able to renegotiate the terms with the Sephardic community in Eretz Israel, so they allow a portion of the money to go to the Ashkenazi community. So Baruch Hashem, he is able to give good foundations. Not only that, while he's in Vilna, he is printing a commentary of the Gra on the Talmud Yerushalmi Masechet Shkalim, and his own notes on the commentary of the Gra, called it Takelin Chadetin. That means new shekels. Now, as you can imagine, for him, it was all coming together. Why? It's Talmud Eretz Israel, right? Talmud Yerushalmi, so it's the Torah Eretz Israel. The topic is Shkalim, that is donations, and he is bringing the Torah of his master, of his Rebbe, the Gra. So everything works perfect. Now, he had his wife and children back in Eretz Israel, so he wanted to go back, but everything seems very promising. They were able to secure yearly income. They were able to secure the support of the people of Lithuania to the Prushim in Eretz Israel. So he is going back, and Be'ezrat Hashem, everything would be wonderful. There is only one problem. It's not going to be wonderful at all. And it begins that when he comes back is 1813. Now, you may remember Napoleon, exactly. Exactly. So if you remember your history classes in school, 1813 is Napoleon raging all over Europe, basically. And it's very, very difficult to come back from Eastern Europe, from Lithuania, to Eretz Israel, because Napoleon is also in war with the Ottomans. He's in war with everyone. And so it's very, very difficult. And in the end, he's able to do so. You may see in source Dalet here, in the end of his printing of Takelin Chadetin, of this commentary to Masechet Shkalim, you understand when there is such a, nowadays we do not call it World War, right? Because there is the World War I is in the beginning of the 20th century. However, to be honest, it is more or less the First World War, the Napoleonic War. So when you see such an event, a global event, it is not, I think, surprising that messianic expectations begin to be built up. And again, the Gra also, in a sense, we do not know to what degree, it seems also that he had encouraged his students that Aliyah to Eretz Israel may hasten the Yeshua. So in the ending of his introduction to his commentary, look at source ד' נזכה שיתקבצו כל אחינו בני ישראל ארץ הקודש. So we hope that we would marry, that all of the Bnei Israel would come to the Holy Land. And then he says something that for you may seem very simple, but it's a revolution. כיוון שיקובץ נדחי ישראל, מתרוממת קרן הצדיקים. When the people would gather, then the tzadikim would be heightened. וכיוון שתתרומם קרן צדיקים, ירושלים נבנית. And then ירושלים would be built. וכיוון שנבנית ירושלים, after ירושלים would be built, משיח בן דוד בא ויבנה בית המקדש. Now, you have to understand. If you'd ask 99% of the Jews in Chutz La'aretz, what is the right order of things? They would say, we are waiting for Mashiach to come, and he will take us to Eretz Israel. And he is writing here, and in a simple, just a dedication in the end of his introduction, he says, no, that's not the right order. First, we need everyone to gather. All the exiles need to be gathered back to Eretz Israel. Then we need to uphold the righteous. Then we need to build Yerushalayim. Only then we should expect Mashiach to come. Now, on one hand, it means that there is a lot of work to do. But on the other hand, it means that there is a work to do that may bring the Mashiach. It's not just us staying in the Galut and waiting or doing good deeds. There is a work plan. And the work plan is to go to Tzfat right now and begin this long process. But as I said, things went very, very, very far from the way that he had dreamed them to happen. And now I want to read with you from his own introduction to this Sefer, to the HaShulchan. Now, he begins the introduction, before what I'm copying here, he begins the introduction writing, as always, as many authors of books do, I don't know why I'm writing the book, that's much beyond me, how do I dare to venture into halacha, who am I to write halacha, etc., etc., etc. And then he says, now I would explain to you why do I dare to write this. So let's begin. Source A. ברם ראיתי מעשה ונזכרתי הלכה. There was something happened to me, and I remember the halacha. כי חובה לאדם לספר מעללי השם. A human being must tell what God had done to him. וכל אשר מביא על האדם איסורים וצרות. Even when he is meeting with איסורים, suffering, וצרות, and troubles, ואשר עוזר בנפלאותיו, when God helps you with his miracles, ובכן גם עליי חובה להזכיר האיסורים וצרות שעברו עליי בייסורי ארץ ישראל. So I must tell you the stories of sufferings that I suffered in ארץ ישראל, כמו שכתוב, יסור יסרה נהיה ולמוות לא נתנני, as it's written, God had went me go through a lot of suffering, but he didn't, חס וחלילה, brought me to death. So he says, בשנת תקע"ג, 1813, בשובי ממדינתנו, after I returned from Lithuania, from our state, right, from Lithuania, עזרני הרחמן ויסדתי יסודות קבועות ליישוב ארצנו בכל גלילותינו. So I established the foundations for the יישוב. Everything looked great. פגעתי בזמן צרות המגיפה בגליל הקדוש. But when I returned, it was a plague. It was a מגיפה. לא, רחמנא ליצלן, לא תקום פעמיים צרה, ותעשה בני אדם כדגי הים, just like the fish in the water running from side to side in order to run away, to escape the hunters. So human beings in Eretz Israel, says, were running from one place to another in order to escape the plague. What they didn't know, of course, is that when they are running from one place to the other, they are carrying with them the germs. ויברחו אנשים רבים למדבריות וליערות בשיירות. There were convoys, caravans of people running away from the cities. וגם אני ובני ביתי נסענו לעיר הקדושה ירושלים, תיבנה ותיכונן. ואני בדרך מתה עליי נווט ביתי. So when they were in the, unfortunately, they were already sick. So when they began the traveling, his wife, which he just met after 2 years of traveling abroad. So they just reunited. And she passed away from the disease, from the Magifa. נווט ביתי, אשת נעורים, הצנועה, יראת השם, מרת הניה, תהא נשמתה צרורה בצרור החיים ביום ה' סיוון, ערב שבועות. ויקבריה בדרך, you see that the words here, the words from Yaakov Avinu speaking about Rachel. He says, I had to bury her in the way in שפרעם, תיבנה ותיכונן. ובבואים, now he had no, but the disease is still running amok, so he doesn't even have time to sit for Shiva. He had to continue. He was with young children. ובבואי עם בני ביתי לעיר הקודש ירושלים, גם שם מצאתי מחדרים אימה. But however, the disease was already also in Yerushalayim. And again, I would imagine that he carried it with them. Not necessarily he alone, I'm sure that there were many. But obviously, if his wife died in the way, they were already with it. So he says, גם שם מצאתי מחדרים אימה וחשיכה על המוות בחלוננו, ושם נלקיתי בכפליים בעוונותינו הרבים. So he says, there I was stroke, double portion. בנה יצאוני ואינם. He said, I lost 2 sons. בחורי חמד חמודי לבבי. בראשונה החל הנגף, first the disease began, he says, with my son-in-law. I had a son very young, 18 years old. They were just married. חתני המופלג השנון וירא שמיים כבוד מורנו ורבינו הרב יואל בן לאותו צדיק מחותני המנוח מורי אידל ז"ל ביום כ"ז תמוז, and he was טוב שנה, meaning that's 17 years. ואחריו נפטרה ביתי, his wife was his daughter, ביתי הצנורה מרת לאה, נשמתה עדן בת חי שנים ביום י"ד אב, so כ"ז תמוז י"ד 3 weeks apart. ונשאר ממנה תינוק יונק, there was a baby that remained. And now we had to also to take care of his grandson, of the baby. נכדי המופלג אליאקום יקיר, סבלתי איסורים רבים לגדלו. He says, I suffered a lot until he was 20 years old, and then he also died. ונלקח ממני במוצאי החג דמוצאי שביעי תקצ"ד. So that was a look into the future. Now we return to the מגפה of the 13. Meaning the 13, 14, 18, 13, 14. So we return there. אחר כך נפטר בני הנחמד כמר נחמן, ערב שבת קודש ט"ו באב. So on י"ד אב, his daughter died. On ט"ו אב, his son died. וביתי הנחמדה מרת אסתר, another daughter, נפטרה י"ד אב. ואחר כך נפטר בני הנחמד. All of his family. All of his family. בני הנחמד זך השכל, בן י"ד שנים, 14 years old, כבוד מורי זאב וולף, יום א' י"ז אב, so they are all in the same, basically in the same week. ובא אליי שמועה רעה מהגליל הקדוש, שנפטר אדוני אבי הרבני המופלג, בתורה ויראת שמיים, עסקן במצוות כבוד מורנו ורבינו הרב שמואל זצ"ל, עם אמי מגדלתי הצדקניות, מרת מלכה נשמתה עדן. So we remember his parents also made aliyah. They remained, I guess they were too old now, they didn't want to run away from the Galil. They died in the Galil. So now the rumor comes to him that not only that he's losing all his wife and almost all of his children, as we'll see, in Yerushalayim, his parents also died in the Galil. That's very, I think it's very difficult even to imagine what he's going to mean. He made such a mitzvah, he made aliyah. He paid and he's paying with everything. 40 of that. I think many people would have said, you know what, I did my best, that was the outcome, now just leave me alone. הייתי כשוכב בלב ים באש התבערה. So he says, I was like a drowning man in the middle of a fire. אוהביי ורעיי רחקו ממני. My friends, my beloved, all were now distance. הייתי שוכב על הגג, בוכה ומתנפל ומתחנן לפני אבינו שבשמיים. Now there was only one daughter that remained. ביתי הצנועה מרת שיינדל תחיה. הייתה גם כן קטנה חולה מוטלת על ידי. So the last daughter is lying next to him on this roof. And he says, ודמעותיי על לחיי. My tears were on my cheeks. עיניי ירדו מים על כל אשר עבר עליי. I was always crying for everything that I went through. וגדול קיים שברי. My pain was as the sea, vast as the sea. And then, בגליל הקדוש הלכו עדרים עדרים אנשי אמת, גדולי חבורתי. He says, the whole Yishuv, everyone was dying. Everything was collapsing. Everything that I worked for, everything was falling down. And he says, והוצאתי מילים בשפל כל התחינה לאשר את דקה ישכון נוכח שער השמיים לאמור. And then I spoke to Hashem. אנא מלך מלא רחמים. So that's amazing. Again, someone else would say, what are you doing to me? Like Eob, my job. Speaks to himself to הקדוש ברוך הוא. Let's make an account for a second. But he even now says, Ana melech maleh rachamim. You are the God, King God, full of mercy. That's very difficult to imagine. How can someone says full of mercy after everything that he has gone through? חוסנה ורחם על שארית פליטת בית ישראל, עוד מוצל מאש, אחרי שולחם האם עם הבנים, we already lost the mother and the chicks. ותפסתי מעשה אבינו הזקן יעקב אבינו עליו השלום אשר I decided I would go after Yaakov. Now, why does he feel so connected to Yaakov Avinu? Because his name is Israel, right? So he's feeling connected to Yaakov Avinu. He says, I took what Yaakov Avinu took. What is it? When Yaakov Avinu was running away from Esav, he made a vow, right? He made a neder, that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would save him, then he would give Maser. So what neder did he do? So, כן אנוכי נדרתי נדר למו. I also took a vow. והיה אם תעשה עמדי חסד, והקימותי מחולי זה, אז אייגע לסדר חיבור. I would write a book. And he continues now, it's amazing. The continuous story is amazing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had mercy on him. He tells that he made this vow, and he fell asleep from crying. And in his dream, there was a man coming to him and said to him, Nagof verapo. Meaning there would be a disease, but now there would be healing. And then he woke up, and his daughter was recovering. After all of the children that he had lost, the daughter recovered, and she got married, the daughter, and he tells and she had children. Also, he himself remarried with a woman named Yuta Beila, and he went to return to Tzfat. Now, you would think that everything now would go great. We had our share of troubles. That's not how things went. In the year of Tafkuf Ayin Daled, the disease came back, he says. And his new wife now was extremely sick, but Baruch Hashem, she says, she did recover. However, there was another problem. There was a certain Jewish Sephardi guy, Reb Chaim Abulafia, that he was like the mediator between the Pasha, the Arabic ruler, and the Jews. And he was very loved by the Pasha, and he was able always to have tax reductions for the Jews. He was doing great. But there is always a price to pay. And the price to pay was that when the Pasha was replaced, the son did not take to the liking of Chaim Abulafia. Now, Chaim Abulafia was told in advance that he should run away. However, he said, I'm not running away because if I would run away, he would take his revenge on the Jews. So I prefer to be there, and he would take his revenge on me. And that's what happened. The new governor murdered Chaim Abulafia. But unfortunately, he was not satisfied with that alone. There were also because they accused the Jews that because of the tax reductions that they were stealing money. So now they wanted them to pay for everything of all of the tax reductions of the years before, and it became very, very difficult. And so there was hunger, and the diseases again is coming back and forth. So he lost another son from the new wife. They lost another son, Kemar Shmuel Ze'ev, and then another son called Menachem. And he himself was thrown to the jail because the community was not able to pay the taxes. So the way of the governor to make sure the taxes would be paid was to throw the head of the community to jail, because he knew that the Jews would not abandon R Yisrael of Shklov. So he was thrown to the jail in Akko. And then he was released after a few years. They were able to pay, and then it's really amazing. In 1825, 100 years ago, in 1825, there was great rain in Tzfat, 101 years ago. Yeah. 200, excuse me, that's right, 200 years ago. 200 years ago, there was a great rain in Sfat, and many houses were not built to such a good standard, and many houses collapsed, including the house of Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov. However, he survived. He and his wife and a daughter survived, and he understood that as a sign from heaven. Why didn't you pay your debt? Right? Because you took a vow that you'd print the book. So he sat down to write the book. What is this book? The book is basically, it's called Peat HaShulchan, meaning the end or the side end of the Shulchan. What Shulchan we speak here about? Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch has 4 volumes. However, it lacks halachot atluyot ba'aretz. It has something about trumot umasrot, but there is nothing about leket, nothing about shichecha, nothing about pea, almost nothing about shmita, nothing. So he said, I am going, no, that's an amazing venture. I am going to complete the Shulchan Aruch. And the way that he writes it, I don't know, I hope that you can see, but there is like the Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote himself also the commentary. So there is the Shulchan Aruch and the commentary. The Shulchan Aruch relies 70%, 80% on the Rambam. And then here he has the commentary called Beit Israel. Now again, Israel is his name. Israel is also the house of Eretz Israel he wants to build. Also, it's the Rashi Tevot of all of his immediate family that he lost in Eretz Israel. So it's for him again, that's something that is written from the blood of his heart. It's not only a theoretical academic work. And in it, he brings all of the sources. It's not an easy read at all. It's not an easy read at all. But the halacha, again, the commentary is difficult. The halacha is halacha. And that was used as the basic textbook for halachot atluyot ba'aretz, at least for Ashkenazim, for more than 100 years. Nowadays, it's a little obsolete because of the Chazon Ish and Rav Kook and others. So things have, there are other sources now, but it's still a very important sefer. There is a lot to speak about. Even then was not the end. The book, so he wrote the whole book. There was a printing house in Tzfat. That's amazing by itself. By a guy, very famous to those who are interested in printing, in the printing business in Eretz Yisrael of the time, called Israel Beck. And he brought the printing material from Europe. And he settled in Tzfat. However, they finished the sefer, the preparation for printing. You know, they ordered the letters, everything. And then the Druze made a revolt. And they went into Tzfat, they plunged everything, they murdered, they looted. It was a real disaster. Many people were killed. And they burned the printing house. So the book was again delayed. They found most of it still intact, so they were able to print, but it took a long time before they were able to reconstruct the printing house. So it was only printed at 1836. He himself was injured, and he leaped on his legs from there on. In 1836, on Tu B'Shvat. I didn't know that, and it's not a very famous detail. I was able to see that because I went to see the first, that's not the first print, as you can imagine. So I went over the internet, they have the first print online. And on the end of the Sefer, it says it's called the kolfon. It's like an ending from the guy that printed. And it's not Rabbi Yisrael himself. It's the printer guy. It's the Bachur HaZetzer, as we say. And he writes there that's in the last source here. You can see source Vav. ותשלם המלאכה מלאכת הקודש, לסדר ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים גוי קדוש, ב15 יום לחודש, the 15th in the month, ראשון הוא ראש השנה לאילנות. So it's not לחודש הראשון, that's Nisan, but it means that's the first, which is the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. So it was first printed, so if you'd make the calculation, 1836, that is 190 years exactly on the day from tomorrow. Right, tomorrow is Tu B'Shvat, 190 years ago. It's more or less the only important sefer that was printed in Tzfat. Later, Israel Beck said that's enough, took his things, and went to Yerushalayim, and there he became, again, a very famous printing house. A year later, there was the great earthquake. Anyone that knows anything about the history of Tzfat, the great earthquake on 1837, and that completely decimated everything that Rabbi Israel worked to build at the last 20 years. That was that. The Jewish settlement was completely destroyed, and many were killed, and the remnants just left to Yerushalayim. He himself also went to Yerushalayim. He lived there for another 2 or 3 years, but obviously that was the final stroke. He was a man of great conviction and of great faith. I think it's clear from everything that he has done. But he was not so young. He was not very old. But again, for what he has suffered, that makes you. So if we do not know for sure, but let's imagine that he was really born at 1770, and we speak about 1839, 1837, 1839. So he's 70. Again, that's for us, that's young. But for them, it was not so young. And for someone who suffered for all of that, then I think for him it was just too much. So he's going to Yerushalayim, but his health is failing. And he is advised by the doctors to go to Tiberia. In Tveria, they say you'd have a better air. But and there are also Mayanot Marpeh, bathhouses in Tveria. So he went there. He hoped that it would help him. However, unfortunately, a few months later, he passed away. Now, for years, they didn't know where he is buried and didn't know the date of the birth of the death. Only in 1964, they found in the old cemetery of Tiberia, they found a half stone which they were able to reconstruct and to understand it was the matzeva of Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov. And there it says that the date of the Ptira was Tet Sivan Taf Kuf Tzadik Tet, which is May 22nd, 1839. 1839. So he was buried there, and his grave is still there in Tiberia. Now again, he is a man that I think is a demonstration of the statement of the Gemara that Eretz Yisrael niknet b'isurin, that you have to acquire Eretz Yisrael by suffering. We think that what we have gone through is isurim, but when we see what these people had to go through, then of course that's on a completely different scale. It's a completely different thing. And but they didn't back down. And they stayed and they believed and they wrote and they used the troubles that they were facing not it was not something that was making them weaker. They used it as a leverage to strengthen themselves. I think that's a very important lesson of what he was able to do. And as I said, he was able to write a part of really establishing the Ashkenazi settlement here in Eretz Israel and being a very important player in that. He was also, the book that he wrote is very important to this very day. Now, there is a lot of Torah that we can learn through the book, but however, our time is up, and I just invite everyone who is interested to go through a little. He has very interesting halachot regarding Shemitah, regarding if your parents tell you not to go to Eretz Israel, are you allowed to go? He has a long essay about that, and many other interesting questions. What happens when Ashkenazim and Sfaradim come to the same shul? That's not a question that happens in Lithuania. That's a question of Eretz Israel. How do you daven? All of these questions he tackle in the book. Extremely interesting, as I said, not an easy read, but very enlightening. And may his memory be of blessing, and may we all have a nice Tu B'Shvat of being replanted in the Holy Land. Yeah, for sure.
That like taking as halacha, like as the guiding halacha for a lot of instances?
Yeah, for many, not for all of them, but for many. At the beginning, when people were beginning to write new editions or new halachic books, so the way to do it was to reprint the HaShulchan, but in the end to add an appendix with what you disagree. So, for example, Rav Kook and his father-in-law, the Aderet, reprinted the HaShulchan 100 years later with their own appendix in the end. On this edition, that's an edition of Agudat Israel. Here they removed the Rav Kook. Although they reprinted, it's an obst photocopy of the Rav Kook edition, but they took out the pages with Rav Kook, and instead they put some pages from Rav Zalman Kahana, who was a student of the Chazon Ish. So so that's the way, if you want your halacha to be heard, at least at some period, the right way to do it was by connecting them to the HaShulchan. However, as I said, nowadays, I don't think that people use this book anymore. So what you have his halachot were integrated into more modern works, which we use more nowadays.
You know what interesting, Rabbi? We all know all this Rabbanim and that, but we never know who supports that. Give money to really work and give money, and then they are part of establishing all this Israel as well.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Some of them we do have some names. Yeah, some of them he mentioned in his Akdama. He mentioned the names of the people that contributed money.
Yeah.
So that's how they are being remembered.
Rothschild. I mean, there are people
No,
that.
I'm talking about Rothschild